Mill floor shakes under your boots.
Lint fills the air like snow that never lands. A girl, 12 years old, reaches into a spinning machine to free a jammed thread. She's done it 1,000 times. This time, the machine doesn't wait.
Sit it.
4,000 miles away, in a Mississippi field, a woman picks cotton until her fingers bleed. These two lives never meet.
Thread connects them forever.
Stay close, hit subscribe, because this story only gets darker.
Sigh.
You're standing in a field outside Natchez, Mississippi, in the summer of 1850. The heat presses down like a hand on your chest. Rows of cotton stretch to the horizon, white bowls glowing in the early light. Almost beautiful. If you don't look too closely at the hands picking them, cotton wasn't just a crop in the American South. It was religion, currency, and cruelty, all woven into one plant. By the mid-1800s, the United States grew more cotton than any nation on earth. Nearly all of it came from the backs of enslaved people. Over 3 million of them by 1850, forced into fields from Virginia to Texas. A woman named Harriet, we'll call her that,
Modern.
though history rarely bothered to record real names, moves down the row with a canvas sack slung over her shoulder. She picks fast. She has to. Overseers weigh the cotton at sundown, and falling short means the whip. Her fingers are cracked and bleeding from the sharp edges of the cotton bowls. She doesn't stop. She can't. Here's what makes this story bigger than one field, one plantation, one state. That cotton in her sack isn't staying in Mississippi. It's not even staying in America. It's about to cross an ocean. Ships wait in the ports of New Orleans and Charleston, their hulls built to swallow thousands of bales. Cotton brokers in linen suits negotiate prices while enslaved dockworkers load the bales,
Sweat.
soaking through their shirts in the humid southern air. The smell of the harbor is thick with salt, tar, and raw cotton fiber. A smell that will follow this crop across the Atlantic. By the 1830s, cotton made up more than half of all U.S. exports. Half. Think about that. An entire nation's economy tilted on the axis of a single crop, picked by people who owned nothing.
Themselves.
And where was all that cotton going? Not to American factories. Not yet. The finest, efficient textile mills in the world sat 5,000 miles away. In a smoky, rain-soaked English city called Manchester. The ships raise their sails. The bales are stacked deck to deck. Somewhere below, packed into burlap, is cotton that Harriet's hands touched just weeks before. She will never know where it goes. She will never see what it becomes.
You're about to.
The Manchester docks in 1850 smell like nothing. Harriet would recognize coal smoke, wet stone,
Machine oil.
layered over the damp English air. This city has a nickname, and it isn't subtle. Cottonopolis. The cotton capital of the world. Walk through the streets, and the sound hits you before anything else does. A low, constant roar. Thousands of mechanical looms clattering in unison, audible from blocks away. Manchester in 1850 has over 100 cotton mills. Chimneys rise like a forest of brick, each one coughing black smoke into a sky that hasn't been blue in years. Inside one of these mills, a girl named Ellen, 11 years old, threads her way between machines twice her height. She's small enough to reach into tight spaces that grown workers can't, which is exactly why mill owners want children like her.
Small hands steep.
Fast fingers, cheap wages if you can call 3 shillings a week wages at all. The machines never stop. The spinning jenny, the power loom, engineering marvels of the age. Raw cotton fiber into thread, and thread into cloth at speeds no human hand could match.
Machine can do the work of 100 spinners.
This is the engine of the Industrial Revolution, and Manchester is its beating.
Choked hot.
Here's the connection that most people never learn in school. By 1850, over 80% of the raw cotton feeding these machines came from the American South. Not India, not Egypt, the South.
Mills.
And by extension, England's entire economic boom
Almost entirely.
on cotton picked by enslaved hands across the ocean. Ellen doesn't know this. She's never heard of Mississippi. She's never heard of Harriet. But the raw material passing through her small fingers, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, traveled through the same violent system that kept Harriet in chains. The air in the mill is thick with cotton dust, so heavy that workers develop a condition they call brown lung. Their airways clogging slowly over years of breathing in fiber. Ellen coughs. Nobody stops the machines for a cough. The overseer walks the aisles with a leather strap ready to snap it against any worker who slows down. This is what economic historians would later call wage slavery, a phrase that infuriated some and rang painfully true to others.
Isn't in chains.
She can, in theory, leave. But where would she go? Her family depends on her wages. The city offers no other work for an 11-year-old girl. Freedom on paper doesn't always feel like freedom in practice. Outside the mill, wealthy cotton merchants live in grand townhouses, their fortunes built on this very same thread. They attend the theater. They drink imported wine. They rarely, if ever, set foot inside the mills that fund their comfortable lives, let alone imagine the cotton fields 4,000 miles away. Two worlds, two forms of exploitation.
Single crop tying them together.
Invisible thread stretched across an ocean. And soon, that thread is about to snap. April 1861. The first shots of the American Civil War echo across Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Nobody in that harbor knows it yet, but this gunfire is about to reach Manchester, 4,000 miles away, and hit harder than anyone could imagine.
The Union Navy moves fast.
President Lincoln orders a blockade of southern ports, choking off the South's ability to sell cotton to the world. It's a military strategy. It's also, without anyone fully realizing it, an economic weapon aimed straight at England. Within months, cotton shipments to Manchester collapse. Warehouses that once overflowed with bales sit empty. The machines that roared day and night begin to slow, then stop.
Mill at a time.
Historians would later call it the Lancashire Cotton Famine, and famine is not an exaggeration. By late 1862, over half of Manchester's mill workers are unemployed. Ellen, now grown, walks past mills she once worked in, their windows dark, their chimneys silent for the first time in her memory. The roar that once defined this city has gone quiet.
The silence is its own kind of horror.
Families that depended entirely on mill wages now face starvation. Soup kitchens stretch around city blocks. Children who once worked 12-hour shifts now spend their days searching gutters for scraps of coal to keep their homes warm. Nearly 200,000 people in Lancashire fall into poverty within a single year. Here's where the story takes a turn nobody in the American South expected. The Confederacy believed cotton was their trump card. They called it King Cotton diplomacy, a bet that England, desperate for cotton,
Decians ins at teas.
would recognize the Confederacy and even intervene militarily to break the Union blockade. Southern leaders were confident,
Chester.
needed their cotton too badly to let politics get in the way. They were wrong. In December 1862, in the middle of the worst suffering Manchester had faced in generations, mill workers gathered at the Free Trade Hall. Cold, hungry,
employed.
Because of a war fought to preserve slavery in a country most of them would never visit, they voted on a resolution.
Tun.
They chose to support the Union blockade. They chose to support the end of slavery,
Zust.
even though it meant prolonging their own economic disaster. They wrote a letter to President Lincoln himself. Lincoln wrote back. He called their sacrifice sublime, an act of Christian heroism unmatched in any age or country. Today, a statue of Lincoln stands in Manchester's Lincoln Square. Most tourists walk past without knowing why an American president is memorialized in an English city. Think about that choice for a moment. Workers with empty pockets and hungry children,
Dizzy.
choosing solidarity with enslaved people they had never met over their own immediate survival. Not every worker agreed, grew desperate enough to demand their leaders find any cotton source anywhere, regardless of politics. But the vote held.
It was sent.
Meanwhile, Harriet's world was collapsing in an entirely different way. As Union forces pushed deeper into the South, plantations fell into chaos. Some enslaved people fled toward Union lines the moment soldiers came near, seeking a freedom that felt, for the first time,
Reach.
Others waited, watching, uncertain if the promise of freedom would actually reach height, their forgotten corner of a cotton field. Two forms of suffering,
Same crop.
born from the same cry at the same historical moment. And neither Harriet nor Ellen could see the whole picture. Neither could see how their individual, painful, ordinary days connected to a global system built on one plant, one thread, stretched across continents. But that thread was about to be tested and rebuilt in ways nobody expected. The Civil War ends. At least on paper,
Ends with it.
in Mississippi, Harriet, if she survived the war, if she survived the plantation, walks off the land that once owned her. Freedom, though, doesn't come with land, money, or tools. Many formerly enslaved people find themselves trapped in a new system almost identical to the old one. Sharecropping.
Nas.
They farm the same cotton fields for the same landowners under contracts designed to keep them in permanent debt. The chains changed shape. They didn't disappear. In Manchester, the mills slowly roar back to life as southern cotton exports resume. But the city that emerges from the cotton famine is different. The suffering of those years and the choice its workers made become part of Manchester's identity. This is a city that remembers standing on the right side of history,
Signed in the city.
even when it cost them everything. Walk through Manchester today, and the cotton mills are mostly gone, converted into apartments. Trendy coffee shops with exposed brick walls that once vibrated with the sound of 100,000 looms. The People's History Museum sits near the old mill district,
Luns.
telling the story of workers who fought for dignity against impossible odds. Walk through the Mississippi Delta today, and cotton still grows in some of those same fields, though machines now do the picking. The descendants of enslaved people who once worked that land still live in many of these same towns,
Past.
in a region that remains among the poorest in the United States,
Legacy.
that historians directly trace back to the economic architecture built on slavery and cotton. Here's the uncomfortable truth this story leaves you with. The thread connecting Manchester and the American South never fully broke.
Just changed form. Lun.
Global supply chains today still stretch across oceans, still connect the hands that make things to the people who buy them, still hide labor conditions behind layers of distance and convenience. Somewhere right now,
Journey.
you own, traveled through a supply chain you've probably never thought about. Cotton grown in one country,
To thread in another.
sewn into a shirt in a third, shipped to a store near you. The distances have changed.
Disconnect.
The disconnect between maker and buyer, that hasn't changed nearly as much as we'd like to believe. Harriet's name was likely never recorded anywhere. Ellen's story survives only in mill records and census data.
Name.
Among thousands of children who worked those floors, neither of them ever knew the other existed. But their labor, their suffering, and briefly, in 1862, their fates intersected across an ocean because of a single crop. That's the strange power of history. It connects people who never meet across distances they could never imagine. Through forces bigger than any single life, the next time you pick up something made of cotton, a t-shirt, a bedsheet, a pair of jeans, take a second and think about the thread. Not just the fiber, but the story. Fields in Mississippi,
Manchester.
mills in Manchester, a war that shook continents, and the choices ordinary people made in the middle of it. If this story moved you,
Surpassed.
if it made you think differently about the clothes on your back or the history books that left these details out,
Me know in the comments.
which part surprised you most? Harriet's story, Ellen's story, or the workers of Manchester choosing solidarity over survival? Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. The hidden threads connecting history's biggest moments to the ordinary lives caught inside them. Because the past isn't as far away as it looks. Sometimes it's woven into the very clothes we wear.
Resting at last, every story is held by a single thread, and some are simply left to drift away.